Welcome to Hive Mind. This is Edge with my co-host Speaker. How's it going, Speaker?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Doing all right. Gonna have an interesting conversation today about the end of the world. No, actually, I thought this would be a good conversation because it kind of does keep coming up, and it's just par for the course for 2020. So, about a month ago, the Mayan calendar reemerged with a new prediction, which the date's already passed. It was June 21st was the latest prediction. So I thought, it would be a good idea that we talk about the Mayans, talk about the Mayan calendar, kind of what it all means, and put it into some perspective as far as what's going on today. What do you think?
Yeah, the Mayans are an interesting culture, like a really interesting civilization. I mean, they're up there with the Egyptians when it comes to this sort of stuff. So it's with our podcast. So I'm going to chuck this out there first. Like with our podcast, we kind of just decide on things that we are interested in on the week, and we just pick them randomly. And we're like, just a cool topic, and we kind of pick things that we want to learn more about. So we understand there's going to be some people that like certain podcasts that don't like certain podcasts. So the views might be good on some and not on others, and we're pretty cool with that. Like we don't really do this for views, but we do love the comments. The comments are fantastic. Like the reason we do these things is mostly to create a community and to create the feedback of other people pushing their ideas and pushing things that maybe we got wrong, or other aspects or other channels. And that's what I really loved about the last one we did, is there were so many great comments from you guys, and absolutely amazing, like telling us different places to look, different channels that are doing that. And that's what we really want to see. That's why we really do this. Views don't matter to us, but the comments are absolutely fantastic when you can create a sort of community around this stuff. And we did have a couple of messages asking us if we take requests. We'll put them on the list because we do have a real long list, and we can only do one of these a week, unfortunately, at the moment, because of our other family lives, and we both have other jobs. But those comments are absolutely amazing. I do read them all, and I try as hard as I can to get back to every single one. So I just wanted to chuck that out there first before we dive into the Mayans.
Yeah, appreciate you guys so much and love the comments. We get some really amazing feedback and even, constructive criticism or ways to expand on our research. And all of that is truly appreciated, and it helps us to grow and get better. We don't claim to be experts on any of this. We just like to talk about certain things. Certain things do just really pique our interest. Both Speaker and I love ancient civilizations, varying ancient civilizations, and have talked about it many times in the past. So it's just a fun conversation, but we do like to bring some relevance to the present, to whatever conversation that we're having, so that you have some kind of context for how this applies to you today and is important to you, and more than just it's interesting piece of history sort of way, because it does all have relevance to today. So, and the Mayan culture and the Mayan calendar is no exception to that. So, Speaker, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's just give some kind of basics on, the time in history that the Mayans came to rise, and just a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Mayan civilization is split into three sort of periods, exactly the same as the Egyptians, actually. So, like in ancient Egypt, we had the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. In the Mayan civilization, they had the pre-classic period, which was between 2000 BC and 250 AD. The classic period, which was 250 AD to 900 AD, and the post-classic period, which was 900 to 1519 AD, roughly. I found that real interesting with the parallels with the Egyptians. And so, like, at the peak of Mayan culture, they ran for about 2,000 years. It's very similar to the Old Kingdom as well in Egypt. So the parallels between these cultures are amazing, and also the pyramid parallel, which is
Yes.
interesting. And we'll get it. With that, yes, I have a feeling that Edge is going to get in on that. Right? So the origins of the Maya. Uh, the Mayan civilization is based around the Yucatan region of South America. So that is Central America, which stretched through modern day Central America, like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Belize, South Mexico, and all those areas. Uh, it consisted at its peak around 40 cities. Now these were self-governing cities or city states, which is absolutely phenomenal when you're looking at the time frame this is going back on. This was a highly cultured civilization. 40 cities self-run, and at its peak, you were looking at a population of between 2 and 5 million people.
Wow, that's staggering.
It's staggering for the time period.
It is. In the middle of this thick jungle, you know, and really without a lot of outside influence, which is just truly
No
amazing.
outside influence.
Right.
No outside influence that we can really see. I mean, a lot of people believe that they came from Asia, but all those things are debatable. They're really grasping on straws here. But the interesting thing about it is their architecture is absolutely amazing for these tribes. And I wanted to bring this up first before I went a little bit deeper into it. How do some of these civilizations, so look at ancient Egyptians, look at the Mayans, and there was three great cultures in Mesoamerica. So the first one were the Olmecs, after the Olmecs were the Mayans, and after the Mayans were the Aztecs. Now the Aztecs and the Mayans kind of merged together a little bit, and they get very confusing. But how is it that some of these small pockets of civilizations become so technologically advanced compared to others?
Right. Right.
I mean, look at Aboriginals, for example, Australian Aboriginals. Now, there was thousands of Aboriginal tribes scattered all across Australia, but none of them built temples, and none of them built monuments. And once again, this is going back into the Stone Age.
Yeah, not to this scale. I mean, the Mayans' advancements, especially in their language, their written language. I mean, it's unparalleled. It was unparalleled for that area and that time. And so it's really interesting how this sprung up and came about. There are some theories out there, and we're going to get into all those theories as far as transfer of knowledge, transfer of culture from even, you know, possibly a more ancient culture. And of course, there's probably other theories out there as well, but
aliens. There's always aliens.
Yes.
they always come into play with these conversations. But the Mayan language is absolutely unparalleled. When you're looking at, I mean, they consist of nouns, verbs, adjectives. For something going back that time, it was one of the most creative and original writing styles ever created, even to this day. I mean, in a single block, you have these three interpretations. You can have different interpretations using same blocks. It's pretty incredible. And what really kind of tore my heart out on this when I found out about it was during the 16th century, so towards the end of the Mayan rule. And the Mayan civilization got broken down and rebuilt, so 3 times in these 3 periods. But towards the late 16th century and at the end of the post-classic Maya period, when the Spanish Inquisition kind of moved through the Yucatan Peninsula, we had a lot of these friars and religious zealots kind of moving through the Yucatan and destroying a lot of these works of art and a lot of these writings. I mean, there was a friar named Diego de Landa, and he was bent on destroying the writing, the imagery, and everything that the Maya kind of created, especially Maya hieroglyphs, because he saw it as tools of the devil.
Right. Yeah, the language was pretty advanced, and they had it the glyphs there, there were hundreds of glyphs in their written language, but They engraved them on everything from structures, statues, walls, but books. And so these books are, I believe there were like thousands of these books. And those were all collected and burned and destroyed.
And also while he was collecting these books, Diego de Landa also captured thousands and tortured thousands of Maya and put them to the stake and other forms of torture because of devil worship. And this absolutely breaks my heart, man, because there was so much of the Maya that we could have learned from, because they were obviously an amazing civilization that could have taught us things today, and all these civilizations can teach us things today. But when you go burning history like this, and this is why it really gets on my nerves now, when I'm seeing people pull down statues and doing that. This has happened before.
Yep, exactly.
This has happened many of times throughout history, and it's detrimental to humans as a species.
It is. And whether you believe in what the Mayans believed in or not, those texts offered history and knowledge. And it doesn't matter, irregardless of whether you believe it or not, and what they believed in. It's just information, and the destruction of that information is like losing an entire culture. In fact, I think that language was lost because they had to, the survivors, the surviving Mayans, those scribes were forced to learn to write in the new language. And by the 18th century, I believe, all of the ability to read their original language was lost. And then they had to completely go back and decode that language, which took ages, right?
Yeah, so like only out of all those texts and books that Diego de Landa burned, it was said only 4 survived. So from those 4, recent scholars and archaeologists have managed to really bring back the language, which is an amazing feat in itself. And a lot of these Mayans, that because the bloodline still exists today, it still exists through Mesoamerica. I mean, they weren't completely wiped out, but their history was destroyed. Their history was lost, and they were retaught. And the architecture and the art. I mean, these Mayans built great pyramids, temples. They built sports arenas. I mean, it was a sophisticated, intelligent culture in a time where you don't expect these cultures to be around. I mean, there's very few of them to that degree. I mean, you had American Indians and all that around there too, but there was nothing, they never built anything like that apart from maybe the Egyptians.
Right.
And some Asian tribes. But like the art of the Mayans, like the art, like as an artist, this blew me away looking at their writing and their transcripts, because it's all an incredible form of creative art. It involves a level of graphic imagination and expertise that is absolutely unparalleled. I mean, even today, it is very hard to like recreate.
Right. It's like their language was a form of art as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, they were the greatest civilization to be found in the New World that was fully illiterate society.
Right.
Right. And this is where we start going down the road of, you know, what really happened to them or what happened. I mean, during the 9th century, something weird happened, and they just abandoned their great cities.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we don't really know why they did this. I mean, there's theories of overpopulation,
Drought.
drought.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the temples in the lower highlands were just covered by jungle, and they were lost. And they're still finding new cities to this day.
They are. They actually just found one. Oh, it's like about a month or 2 ago. Was announced, I believe. And this one that they've just recently found in Mexico, it's the biggest and oldest, dated to 1,000 years prior to the major cities, which were, Tikal, Palenque,
Takal. Yeah.
Catan. Yeah, but like this one that they found, or the remains of it, or predate it by at least 1,000 years. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to elaborate on the architecture and the similarities with the Egyptians, because you can't deny it. Just to an untrained eye looking at it, you're like, oh, here we go. Here's another area where these gigantic structures, ancient structures are, and of course they're in the shape of pyramids, albeit a little bit different stylistically, but nonetheless gigantic, pyramids. And so you start to draw these correlations, but there's more than just that, as far as the correlations between the Mayan structures and the Egyptian structures. The Mayans were also very interested in aligning their temples with astronomical cycles. In fact, that they were obsessed with astronomy. That was like a key central theme in all of their lives. So these pyramids were no exception to that. They aligned the astronomical pyramids, like Chichen Itza, the pyramid Kukulkan. That pyramid is aligned with north, south, east, west, with and the solar equinoxes. So every spring and fall, there's a solar equinox that makes this perfect image, a shadow of a snake descending. And so that only happens on those equinoxes. And to create a gigantic structure and to accomplish that kind of perfection in the design so that they could mark the equinoxes is quite astounding for that time.
Absolutely unbelievable. They seem to be a people very similar to the Egyptians that was obsessed with the sky,
right?
And obsessed with either the end of the world or renewal of birth or death.
Yes, and I definitely learned a lot about the cycles that they were very keyed in on when I was studying the calendar. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to talk also a little bit more about the temple and the symbolism and the meaning in it. It's all pointing to these cycles, these times, these calendars, because the Mayans kept many calendars. Everybody knows about the long cycle calendar, but they had dozens of calendars. And the temples themselves were actually calendars marking the days of a year. So, there's 4 sides of the Chichen Itza temple. And so the 4 sides each have 91 stairs. And so then at the top, there's a cap at the top. So the total of the steps marks 365 days of the cycle year. So, and there's a lot more symbolism too that you can kind of go deeper into. It's more esoteric as far as these larger inclines on the temple itself being symbolic as far as the time of the history of creation and consciousness. So and people
definitely look at the work of Zeal if you want to go down that
rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really big one. I don't think it's something we can all cover here. But if you want to go down that rabbit hole, Google someone called Ian Zeal.
Yes, but
ZEL.
So these temples, like the Egyptian pyramids, appear to have been much more than just monuments or art or architecture. They were much more than that. Symbolically, they were also tools for observing the sky, just like the Egyptian pyramids. They were also tools for marking, like calendars. And also they were a representation of their belief system as far as these cycles in humanity, everything from a day to these much longer cycles in humanity that they were following. So another interesting parallel about Chichen Itza itself that's very much like the Egyptian pyramid that I was not expecting to stumble upon when I was looking into this is the water beneath it. And when we talked about Tesla, we talked about this, the Egyptian pyramids, and then we also talked about this obviously in the Ancient Egypt podcast as well. So these all connect. Isn't that funny? Everything connects. But Chichen Itza also has this this underground aquifer, so to speak. They call it cenote, and these underground watering holes are all throughout the Mayan cities. But there's one specifically right directly under Chichen Itza itself, and this particular one was used as part of their sacrificial ceremonies, which we're going to get into, their religion, which was very dark. But yeah, so I just found that to be quite interesting that we have yet another pyramid structure like the Egyptian pyramids with a natural water source beneath it. And we talked a little bit about that in the Tesla podcast about what are some theories are out there as to why pyramids would have underground water, which is a way of emitting electrical current, so to speak. So if you want more information on that, go to the Tesla podcast, which we did last week.
There's just so many coincidences to link the two.
Yeah.
Almost cannot be considered a coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. It's just too many coincidences start adding up, and you're like, no, it's got to be more than that. Especially when you look at the mathematics the Mayans used and the astronomy, it's so advanced that you have to just say, wait a second. It's just, where did they get this? I looked into the Mayan mathematics and astronomy, and their number system, it's based off of 20 and powers of 20. But they came up with the concept of zero like by at least 36 BC, and that's really astonishing because a lot of cultures had not come up with the concept of zero yet, and they were working with sums up to hundreds of millions. And their mathematical equations, they were able to measure the solar year with greater accuracy than the Europeans. So at that time, so they were really highly advanced as far as mathematics and astronomy went.
Yeah, well, like right before the end of the Mayan era, the Europeans were going through the Dark Ages. While they were still pulling these calculations out and doing this astronomy, Europe was kind of slipping on a decline.
Mm. And as we've mentioned, they're completely disconnected from Europe and Asia. So where did they get this? Where did they get this just highly advanced form of mathematics and astronomy? It's baffling, but they use the mathematics to create these calendars, which everybody knows the Mayans for their calendars. But
I'm going to get into calendar gate in a minute.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't just have the long count calendar. They actually had a solar calendar, a lunar calendar, a calendar that tracked Venus, Jupiter. So they used these calendars as a way to make decisions in their lives. But they used the mathematics and the precision to create their architecture as well, which, as we've already talked about, perfectly aligned and compass directions, and also an alignment so that you could observe the sun at certain times and observe certain stars. so for the Mayans, astronomy was just hugely important. They based all of their decisions on these alignments of the stars. Decisions on marriages, on when to go to war, planting and harvesting crops, of course, but also things like when to usher in a new ruler. Every decision that they made, they consulted these calendars, which were based on astrological alignments.
So with CalendarGate, Google the Mayan calendar and Google the Aztec calendar, and you will get the same calendar for the majority of images, which is actually the Aztec calendar of the sun. I found that really interesting. I don't know if this is a point to bring up, but I was like, hey, why is not the Mayan calendar the first result?
Yeah, it's weird. There's a lot of misinformation out there. The Mayan calendar, it looks kind of like a clock. It's three wheels that interconnect. So the concept of time, though, in our minds, because we've been using the Gregorian calendar, it's very linear. So, we have a beginning, and then we have events that are marked on that linear timeline leading up to today and going off into the future. But with the Mayans, their concept of time was cyclical, and much more like a circle, or really more like a spiral. And so everything in their minds, as far as time went, repeats itself. Maybe not the exact same events, but as you kind of cycle around to a specific point on that wheel or that spiral, similar events continue to happen in that same sort of repetitive motion, spiraling through time. So that is why they used these cyclical calendars and conceptualized time in that way, and always would refer to these alignments in the stars for decisions on certain things, because there was a time in their minds, there was a time for everything. There was a time for marriages, there was a time for war, there was a time for harvesting, there was a time for laying your crops, there was a time for everything. Here's another connection to the Egyptians that I found very interesting, and maybe you will too, but not only were the Mayans obsessed with Venus and Jupiter, because they followed those very, very closely. Venus they used to determine the positions of Venus, they would use to determine times of when to go to war, for example, or Jupiter as well. So, but they were also very obsessed with Orion, and they actually believed that Orion, or Orion's belt, was the origin or the birthplace of creation. And what I find interesting about that is that the Egyptians were very interested in Orion's belt as well, so much so that they actually created the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, as a three-dimensional representation of Orion's belt. So don't you find that interesting? I just...
Yeah, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, so...
What is it about Orion?
Exactly. What is it about Orion? That's probably a topic for another podcast. But yeah, a lot going on in Orion, apparently. So I want to talk about, before we get into the calendar though, I do kind of want to go more into their religion and talk about that part of their culture, because it's pretty dark.
And most Mesoamerican or South American, and not just them, you're looking at a lot of cultures around the world, have very dark underbellies to them. Very dark. I mean, at the peak of Mayan culture, and in some events, I mean, they were sacrificing up to 80,000 people.
Wow.
That sheer number, if that sheer number doesn't just set you back, I mean, geez, like in each calendar year, they sacrifice 20,000. But on big dates, on like opening of cities or certain ceremonies, it was set up to 80,000 people, one after the other.
That's insane. And it does remind me of other ancient religions that would use human sacrifice, like Baal or Moloch, these types of religions that you would actually see in ancient Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's another similarity there. But really gruesome sacrifices, child sacrifices, like cutting out the hearts of these children to offer to their gods, and then, casting the bodies of the children away. And when you look in these, because they have excavated some of these cenotes, the one like below Chichen Itza, and recovered hundreds of bones, and but they said 80% of them were children, were boys, young boys between age 3 to 11. Yeah, sad, but
It's if you haven't seen a movie called Apocalypto, if you want to get a real visual of this, it was a movie directed by Mel Gibson. Came out in 2006, I think. It gives you a good visual of these people. Of course, it's completely historically inaccurate, and there's a lot of things wrong with it. But as a visual spectacle, it does give you an idea of how brutal these civilizations were.
yeah, it does. Very, very brutal. They were a warring people. They were not a peaceful people. I mean, I think that if you look at the Mayans now, people kind of associate them with being very peaceful and, insightful people. But the people, the Mayans of that time were incredibly violent, weren't they? I mean, they were constantly warring, and everything was very, very bloody.
I mean, this is something when it comes to especially conquests. I mean, when the Portuguese and the Spanish and all that came to South America, it was not like the Spanish were the only bad guys here. I mean, like the Mayans and the Aztecs were not the best sort of people either. I mean, these were two, brawling, brutal civilizations. Now, yes, of course, what the Spaniards did was wrong, but the conquests have happened all throughout history. That's just part of, our collective consciousness. It's just what's happened in our history. You can say that it's right, you can say it's wrong, you can completely disagree with it, but these are the things that have happened, and we just have to look at history. Humans are like a brutal species, and they warred for a long time.
Yes,
between
they did.
Cortez and the Spanish. You see the same thing in America with the Red Indians. A lot of Red Indian tribes were not the nicest people either.
Right. Yeah, so I think that some good adjectives to describe the Mayans of that time. They were as highly advanced as they were brutal. And it's really very interesting. I would kind of describe the Egyptians in a way similarly, wouldn't you?
Similarly, yeah. The Egyptians seemed a bit more creative with their sacrifices, if there was a way to be creative with sacrifices.
Yeah.
But they seemed to, it seemed to be more of a religious process with care. The Mayans, it wasn't really a process with care. I mean, they would just, you don't sacrifice 80,000 people, it just, with a lot of meaning. You just kind of kill people.
Yeah, it's pretty gory.
It's pretty gory. I mean, we have to come to the understanding that the planet that we live on, the history that we have, we are a world built on blood.
Sadly, this is the paradigm we've been in for so long, for all of our understanding of human history. So the Mayans actually had several gods that they worshipped. But I want to highlight one in particular because I find this just really interesting and it draws some parallels and some connections. So, one of the most prominent gods of the Mesoamerica area is this feathered serpent god. And the Aztecs had the same god as the Mayans. The Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl, but the Mayans called him Cacucan. And he's also known to the Mayans as the war serpent. So the earliest texts of Kukulkan depict him as this vision serpent. A vision serpent. What does that mean? But it's this vision serpent is entwined with a figure of a noble. So like a human form and a serpent form is this god, Kukulkan. And then in later texts and in later depictions of Kukulkan, he's described more as an actual historical figure who was a priest or a ruler. And so what's interesting is this man named Edward Herbert Thompson. Well, he devoted most of his career to studying the Mayans back in the 1800s. And, he went as far as like living with them, living among them for several years, learning their language. And in 1879, he published an article in Popular Science Monthly where he was actually, his theory was that the Mayan civilization had originated from Atlantis. And
you in Atlantis.
no, I wasn't even looking for this connection, I swear.
You in Atlantis. This woman in Atlantis, you have no idea.
I'm telling you. This is Edward Herbert Thompson's theory, not mine. And he lived with the Mayans. Okay, but let me tell you what the Mayans told him, because he became friends with them and they started to trust him. And so they would tell him stories because much of their written language, as we've just talked about, was destroyed. And so the only thing they could pass down was just these verbal stories from generation to generation. So what he was told and what he had written about was that they told him stories of a bearded white man who came to Chichen Itza and made his home there. And the bearded white man came in as an invader, but he became their hero. And he was finally worshipped as a god, and he was actually a ruler there too. And they named him Kukulkan, and they used this symbol of the feathered serpent to depict him. So what's interesting is that also the Aztecs have this same story of Quetzalcoatl, and the Mayans who had told Edward this story said that Kukulkan basically did the same thing at Chichen Itza for the Mayans that he did for the Aztecs as well. It was the same being that is depicted between Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. So it's interesting.
So, an interesting connection there is, so the Inca, which was a South American ancient civilization, one of the three great South American, the Americas cultures, along with the Aztecs and the Mayans, they also had a god called the Viracocha. Now, the Viracocha was said to be a white-bearded man. So I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that, but I find that very interesting. Where are these all these white-bearded men coming from? Very interesting. So they also did bloodletting rituals where it wasn't just killing people. It was actually just offering a blood sacrifice. So they would usually use nobility, like noble women, women high up in the ranks, and they would, cut their tongues or other body parts, and then they would burn it as an offering. And from that offering they would have visions. So like from the smoke, a serpent would arise, and then a human form would come from that, where they would be able to have these interactions with either ancestors or underworld gods. And we've seen this in some of their carvings and depictions.
I believe, now this is just straight from my belief, others, I do know they were very prone for their psychedelics. such as mushrooms and marijuana. I mean, the Mayans grew huge fields of marijuana to be used on multiple purposes. So if there's a psychedelic sort of property there, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if they were using some sort of psychedelics to have these visions, but they definitely depicted having visions as part of their religious ceremonies, and where they would commune with either their underworld gods or their ancestors. So, but they believed in three epochs of mankind. Like, we're living in the third epoch and supposedly entering the fourth currently. So the first one, the gods created these people made out of mud, and the mud people, they could speak, but they didn't have minds, so they weren't very intelligent, and the gods were not pleased with that. So they flooded the place, the world, and the mud people were wiped out, and the gods created a second epoch of time where there were a new form of people. They were made out of wood. And in that epoch of time, the people were wise, they were smart, but they had no souls. And they were also immortal. And so that displeased the gods, and then they wiped them out through boiling water. Most of them out through boiling water. And then came the third epoch of time, which is the cycle that, according to the Mayans' belief, that we are currently in, this age of humans. And these humans they believe, were created out of white and yellow maize and were given the blood of the gods. So these humans in this current epoch, the gods almost wiped them out, according to the Mayans, because they became too wise. But instead of wiping them out, they decided to cloud their minds and their eyes. So we're supposedly living in the third epoch of the creation story of the Mayans, if you were to believe that. So, but this kind of illustrates that the Mayans believe in this cycle of creation, destruction, creation, destruction, creation, destruction. And their calendars kind of depict that, and that's kind of where this whole calendar gate has come from, of, the end of the world. So, we'll get into that calendar if you want to.
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay. People talk about when they talk about the Mayan calendar, they're actually referring to the long count calendar. And the calendar operates sort of like a clock in that it has three gears that rotate together. And the long count calendar is meant to measure not just the cycles of the Earth, but it actually measures the cycles of the solar system, the Earth, as well as human consciousness. And so the end of the calendar doesn't actually represent the end of the world as it's been described and predicted in the Mayans' minds. It measures the end of an age and the beginning of a new one. There was this essay that a couple of gentlemen wrote, Sergei Smelyakov and Yuri Karpenko, and the essay is called The Auric Timescale and the Mayan Factor. And what they actually did in this paper was they combined the Earth's precession of the equinoxes as well as the solar system's movement through the galaxy with the Mayan calendar. And it gives you this picture, just stay with me here because this is really interesting, of how the solar system moves through the galaxy, and as well as the precession of the equinoxes. And in this process, it travels through fields of energy that Tesla described as the ether. And when it does that, the fields of energy that the Earth and the entire solar system is traveling through are affected by this energy. And it's not just the Earth that gets affected, is my point. It's actually everything that gets affected, from our solar system to the Earth to even human consciousness, which is a really interesting concept. And this happens on a cycle. And so, the Mayans believe that this is kind of what they're tracking, is this evolution of human consciousness, as well as cycles of the Earth and the solar system. Interesting.
And are we in a time now where it is the time of, let's say, a Great Awakening?
That I was going to get to. Yes, we are. So the Mayan calendar, it seems like it was tracking this progression much in the same way that all of the ancients were tracking it. The Sumerians, Babylonians, Druids, Egyptians, right? Yep. And so, it's very interesting. Another parallel, we have this civilization that's supposedly cut off from the rest of the world, that's highly sophisticated, has an immense understanding of astronomy and mathematics, but also has the same sort of interest in tracking this long cycle. And it's paramount importance to humanity and to the future of humanity. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. And anyone that comes out and says the Mayan calendar has anything to do with the end of the world, they're really simplifying it.
Really simplifying it, yes.
And this is not something to be simplified. These ancient cultures are not something to look down on in that way. Is the best way I could say it. I mean, they did things for reasons, such as the Egyptians. Everything they did for a reason. There's a reason behind it.
Yeah, they had a really, really advanced understanding of this. And when people do simplify it in terms of the world is going to end, that really doesn't tell the entire story. These predictions of the world ending in December of 2012 obviously didn't come true. And there have been many other predictions using the same calendar, but just reinterpreting it. In fact, I think there was one just last month.
Yeah, you should.
So, but that's just a very, very much an oversimplification. They're not actually tracking the end of the world. They're actually tracking the end of an old epic and the beginning of a new one.
So and the end of an age and the beginning of a new age.
Yep. So, of course, the transition period in any beginning of an old epoch to a new one is going to be rocky, because the old one is fighting the new one. And so, and it's not just changes on the earth. That's another misconception as far as what the Mayans believed. We're just going according to what the Mayans believed. It's not just the changes on the earth. It's actually the changes in our entire solar system, the changes on the earth, as well as the changes of mankind. These changes, it's kind of silly to assume that they would happen all in one day. And I don't think that the countdown of the 2012, or if you want to change it to 2014 or even 2020, whatever that single date that you mark as the end of that calendar is, I don't think that any change that were to happen is expected that they expected it to happen in a single day. It's actually just marking the beginning of a transition period. So the transition period, from what they believe, takes years. And we're, according to them and their calendar, we're in that transition period now. So whether you believe it or not, it's kind of irrelevant, but this is what the Mayans believed. But if you do believe what the Mayan calendar is saying, then it doesn't take much of a stretch of imagination to see the transition period before our eyes since 2012 through now. Time seems to be speeding up. Everything's happening exponentially more rapidly. Human consciousness appears to be shifting. there's this global awakening happening all around the world. These old paradigms and old systems are starting to break down and crumble, and a new one is starting to rise up. Don't you see all of those things happening?
100%. Maybe the Mayans weren't wrong after all.
Yeah. Yeah. But I just really am curious about where they got this knowledge. I have theories, and I know, you always make fun of me about Atlantis. I do think it was an ancient culture that influenced all of these civilizations that seem to have just vastly superior understanding of these things. What do you think?
Oh, I have to agree with that 100%. I mean, these things can't spring out of nowhere and spring out all around the world just with slight differences. And I think that Vera Kosher angle is a good one to go down, actually. Who are these bearded white men?
Exactly. Who are the bearded white men? And then, that does tie into some things that Graham Hancock has said that we've talked about in the Ancient Egypt podcast. And just on where they received the knowledge to build these structures, and if there was some sort of transfer of knowledge and understanding and technology and mathematics and astronomy and all of these things to the Mayans, Aztecs, and Mesoamerica as well. Yeah, but he wasn't the only one, Graham Hancock. I mean, there were several people back in the 1800s who had the same theories. I just talked about Edward Herbert Thompson. He spent his whole life among the Mayans, learning their language and hearing their stories, and they told him stories passed down from them about Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, who was a white bearded man. Then there was another guy, John Frederick Valdex, and he was one of the earliest people, like 1800s time frame, where he was drawing the sketches of the Mayan glyphs. And he dedicated much of his life to that. And he believed the Mayan culture had to have originated from Babylonians or Phoenicians. So it's not, we're not alone in this theory that there could have been, may have been, likely could have been a transfer of knowledge and understanding, because there's so many correlations between these different ancient cultures, isn't there?
And it would have to be a seafaring people to pass this knowledge too.
Yep. They would.
Which I think in history we can get into the Piers-Rees map, and we can make a whole podcast on that if you haven't heard about it already.
Yeah, these ancient cultures all connect. There's like future podcasts that we need to do, like maybe an Atlantis one, maybe an Antarctica one. I don't know.
You see how she's put that in there, people? Tried to just seed it in my mind. Hey, maybe we should do an Atlantis one.
I don't know. If you guys are interested, leave a comment below. Let us know if you guys want to know more about these ancient civilizations. We just love talking about these things. We find them fascinating. There's a lot to be learned about our history that we have not been taught, and a lot of connections that really need to be made that haven't, been officially made. A lot of theories out there, but it's just great to expand on those theories and talk about them, and I don't know, get ideas of what you guys think. So definitely interested in your comments.
Definitely. Let's wrap this bad boy up. We love you all.
Yes, we love you guys.
You know it.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to us here on Hive Mind with Speaker and Edge. Please be sure to share this podcast, like and subscribe as well. And we will see you back next time right here on Hive Mind. Peace.